going to be reading 3 scary stories, and then we have a special guest that will also be reading 3 scary stories. The figure appeared again in the upstairs window across the street, and behind the glass, someone stood, not moving, not speaking, just watching. I whipped around, and there he was. The man was crouched on the rail just 20 feet behind me, his head cocked unnaturally low.
His arms became stretched to the point of almost touching his ankles. His neck became horribly outstretched. He had hungry eyes, cold and cunning. He stared at me like a crocodile stares at its next meal. Maybe this was just my mind playing tricks on me, but his head looked like it had turned slightly since we found him.
Sit back, relax, and let's get straight to the first one. I hope you enjoy. When my lease ended abruptly last spring, I scrambled to find somewhere cheap and immediate. That's how I ended up renting the upstairs unit of a narrow duplex on Ashworth Street. The landlord was an older woman named Mrs. Gurney, who told me her late brother used to live in the unit before it sat empty for quite some time. It wasn't terrible. A small kitchen, 2 rooms, and a window in the living space that looked directly across the street. The neighbourhood itself felt quiet in that way old neighbourhoods do. Faded paint on porches, trees crowding overhead, kids' bikes tipped over on the curb. I told myself it was just a stopgap, a place to stay for 6 months until I figured things out. But by the second week, I realised something wasn't quite right with that window. Directly across from me was another house, white siding, grey roof, a porch sagging under its own weight. The blinds in the upstairs window were always down, but sometimes, just sometimes, I'd catch a slight shift, like someone standing behind them. At first I thought it was nothing, a draft maybe, but one night around 2 a.m. I woke up to that feeling, like when you know you're being watched. When I looked toward the street, the blinds in that window were slightly parted, just enough for someone to be peering out. I couldn't see a face, but the angle was unmistakable. Whoever was there wasn't looking down at the road. They were staring directly into my window. The hair on my arms stood up. I closed my blinds and told myself it was just paranoia, and then I tried to sleep. But the next night, it happened again. I mentioned it casually to Mrs. Gurney when I dropped the rent off. She looked at me strangely and then said, "That house has been empty for years. Family couldn't keep up with the repairs. It's condemned now." I pressed her, asked if maybe squatters had moved in, but she shook her head. No one lives there. The city checks every few months. Place is locked up. I wanted to believe her, but that night I left my blinds cracked just enough to watch. And sure enough, sometime past midnight, the slats across the street shifted. Someone was definitely standing there. I tried to convince myself it had been a trespasser, but the more I stared, the less sense it made. The figure, because yes, there was a figure now, didn't move the way a person should. It didn't step away from the window or sway. It stood there for hours, perfectly still, like a shadow pressed against the glass. The next morning, I decided to walk across the street. The porch groaned, weeds pushing through the steps. The front door had a rusted padlock on it. The windows downstairs were boarded shut, and yet, when I craned my neck to look up at the second floor window, the blinds hung in place, undisturbed. Things escalated after that. I started hearing sounds inside my own unit at night. The faintest shuffle of movement near the window, like someone pacing. One evening, I got bold. I sat in the dark with the lights off, staring out through the blinds. Midnight came and went. Then, just past 1, the figure appeared again in the upstairs window across the street. Only this time, the blinds opened wider, deliberately, as though it wanted to see me. For the first time, I caught a glimpse of its face. Not in detail, just pale, almost featureless, like it hadn't been finished. But I knew it was staring right at me. My body froze, every instinct screaming to look away. Instead, I stood up and stepped back from my window. And that's when I heard it, behind me. The faintest click of my own blinds being pulled down. I spun around, but there was nothing, just my empty room, my closed window. The blinds swayed gently, like someone had just let go. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I'd packed what I could into my car. When I drove away, I couldn't stop myself from looking back one last time. Both windows, the one across the street and my own, had their blinds pulled apart, and in each, something pale was standing there, watching. Last year, after a breakup and a messy lease termination, I moved into a small flat above a bakery on Wycliffe Road. It wasn't much, 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and a window that overlooked the alley. But it was cheap and it was mine. The landlord, a man in his 60s named Colin, seemed eager to get it rented. He showed me the base quickly, mentioning almost offhand that the last tenant didn't stay long. I didn't think much of it at the time. In cities, people are always moving in and out. The first few weeks were uneventful. I got used to the hum of the bakery's refrigerators at night, the smell of bread baking at 4 in the morning, and the steady rattle of buses going by. But I couldn't shake one detail Colin had mentioned when handing over the keys. He said, "The upstairs room's locked. Don't worry about it. Belonged to an old lodger years ago. Nothing up there you'll need." I didn't ask. I assumed it was storage, maybe a room full of broken furniture. But every night as I lay in bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, wondering why that room felt heavier than the others. It started with little things. I'd wake up in the morning to find the hallway light on, even though I'd switched it off the night before. My bathroom door would be slightly ajar when I was certain I'd left it closed. One evening, I came home to find the radio playing softly, even though I hadn't touched it in weeks. I blamed myself at first, stress, distraction, but the unease grew. One Friday night, while I was brushing my teeth, I heard a sound above me. Not the pipes or the groan of old wood, a definite sound, a creak, 2 slow footsteps right over my head. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth, staring at the ceiling. I knew that room was locked. Colin had been clear about that. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had started. That night, I barely slept. Every time I startled awake, convinced I'd heard movement upstairs. By morning, I decided I was being ridiculous. Old buildings make noises, but deep down, I knew it wasn't the building. The following week, I caught Colin in the bakery. I brought it up casually, asked if he'd ever heard any noises upstairs. He went quiet in a way that told me I shouldn't have asked. After a long pause, he muttered, "It used to be lit, a long time ago. A young woman stayed there, kept herself to herself. One day, she wasn't there anymore. Left her things, left her rent unpaid. The police never found her. After that, no one stayed in the flat that long. Complaints of footsteps and voices. I locked it up, it was safer that way." I wanted to press him for more, but the look in his eyes warned me off. He wasn't joking. That night, I couldn't bring myself to switch off the light. Every creak and groan of the building felt sharper. At some point, I swear I heard breathing, not in my room, not in the hall, but directly overhead. Slow, steady breathing, like someone lying awake in their bed. I lay there, gripping the blanket so tightly, my hands ached. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under, but I woke up again at 3:11 a.m. Something cold brushed my cheek. When I opened my eyes, the air felt thick, the room unfamiliar. For one disorientating moment, I thought I wasn't in my own bed at all, but in the locked room above. Then I blinked, and I was back in my flat, alone. I lasted another week before I couldn't take it anymore. The final straw came on a Sunday. I just sat down with dinner when I heard movement again, definite, deliberate pacing upstairs. I forced myself to grab a chair and drag it to the hallway and press my ear to the ceiling. The steps stopped. And then, softly, the sound of something dragging across the floor. A chair maybe, followed by 3 slow knocks against the boards, right above where I stood. I got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't even pack properly. I shoved clothes into a bag, grabbed my laptop and left. As I was locking the door behind me, I looked up at the window above. For the first time, the curtains in the locked room were open, and behind the glass, someone stood, not moving, not speaking, just watching. I turned and walked away, forcing myself not to run. I never went back. Colin called me once about the rest of my belongings, but I couldn't face it. I let them go. And sometimes when I pass Wycliffe Road, I can't help glancing at the upstairs window. The curtains are always drawn now, but I know what's behind them, and I know she's still there. When I was 21, I lived in a small town that had one of those stretches of road everyone avoided after dark. It wasn't dangerous in the usual sense. No gangs, no bad lighting, not even any real traffic. But people spoke about it in half-joking tones, as if it carried a bad reputation that no one wanted to acknowledge too seriously. It was an old steel bridge on the outskirts of town, narrow and rusting, spanning a sluggish river that reeked of algae in the summer. The locals called it Old Sycamore Bridge. The only thing remotely notable about it was the line of crooked sycamore trees that grew along the road leading up to it. When I got my first night shift job at the petrol station, I started using the bridge as a shortcut home. It shaved 15 minutes off my walk, and when you finish work at 3 in the morning. Every minute matters. The first couple of times I crossed, nothing happened. It was just a cold, silent bridge, lit only by a single flickering lamp on the far side. But after a week, I started to notice the silence. The river, normally alive with frogs and insects, seemed dead silent whenever I stepped onto that bridge. My footsteps echoed too loudly against the steel, and the air always seemed a few degrees colder, like walking into an invisible pocket of winter. It was about 2 weeks into using the bridge when I first saw it. I was halfway across when I noticed a figure standing at the far end, leaning against the rail. It was a man, thin, dressed in dark clothes. At first, I thought maybe he was just another drunk taking the long way home. But he didn't move. He didn't even turn when my footsteps rang across the steel plates. As I got closer, I realised he wasn't leaning. He was balanced. His feet were planted on the narrow outer rail, toes gripping it like a tightrope walker. I froze. The man slowly tilted his head, just enough to make it clear he knew I was there. I can't explain why, but my whole body screamed at me not to go closer. Instead, I turned and walked back the way I came, taking the long road around town, even though it added almost half an hour. When I got home, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that thin silhouette balanced on the rail, waiting for me to step closer. For days I avoided the bridge, but one night, exhaustion and stubbornness got the better of me. I told myself it was just a man, maybe high or messing around. The mind invents things in the dark. So, around 2:45 a.m, I forced myself across Old Sycamore Bridge. This time, the bridge was empty. The cold air still wrapped around me like a wet blanket, but there was no man. I pushed forward, gripping the straps of my backpack, refusing to look down at the black water moving beneath the slats. Then, right as I reached the middle, I heard it. A single metallic groan, like weight shifting on steel. I whipped around, and there he was. The man was crouched on the rail just 20 feet behind me, his head cocked unnaturally low, like an animal watching prey. I hadn't heard him step onto the bridge. I hadn't heard anything until that groan. I ran. I sprinted the last stretch, heart beating so fast, and didn't stop until I was 3 streets away, lungs burning. When I finally looked back, the bridge was empty. I told myself I'd never use that bridge again, but a month later, walking home in the rain, I found myself staring down the road lined with sycamores. The thought of an extra 15 minutes soaked to the bone made me hesitate. I told myself it was fine, that I'd imagined it, that fear had magnified some drunk or a shadow into something sinister. Halfway across, the silence fell again. He was there. Not at the end this time, not behind me. He was crouching in the middle of the bridge, just ahead, perched on the rail, dripping wet as though he'd climbed out of the river. His arms dangled too long over his knees, fingers nearly brushing the steel floor. I stopped, but he didn't move. Then, slowly, he straightened. One careful motion, like a puppet being pulled upright. He never took his eyes off me. I turned, I ran. I don't remember the sprint, I don't remember the road, I don't remember the sound of my shoes slapping through puddles. I only remember the silence, sometimes in the dead of night, I'll dream of a steel groaning beneath weight, and wake up certain he's still out there, waiting for me to cross again.
Okay, this first story is by Fabulous Bird 3018, and it is titled The Man on the Train Keeps Getting Taller. I doubt anyone is gonna believe me, but I don't care. I recently just opened a convenience store I've spent over a year trying to open. Since we just opened and I only have one part-time employee right now, I pretty much work 7 nights a week. I have to take the last train every night at around 1 a.m. to get home. With this being so routine, I start to see the same people on the train every night. One man in particular I have seen every night for the last 2 weeks. He's a middle-aged man with a beer belly and always wears the same Dodgers baseball cap. These last few nights, something has changed. It started last Saturday. He came on the train and sat on the other side of the train car as normal. And I know this sounds stupid, but I swear he was a few inches taller. Not terribly noticeable, but I swear on my wife's grave his head usually goes to just below the handlebars on the ceiling. But that night his head was the same height as the handlebars. At first I just shrugged it off. Maybe he was slouching before, or I was just misremembering. Monday night was when I knew something was wrong. He was at least a foot taller. He now had to duck under the handlebars just to sit down. I wish I had pictures of before and after, so you knew I wasn't seeing things. I don't know how he's doing it, but he's getting taller. Day by day, night by night, inch by inch. The mere thought of this impossible scenario had been eating away at my mind like a termite. I didn't see him Tuesday night, but when I was taking my kids to the park that morning, I could have sworn I saw him at the park, so tall he towered over the swing set. He had to be over 2 feet taller at that point. I tried telling my part-time employee that night, but he looked at me like I was telling him I saw an alien. I don't even blame him. Your boss you just met starts ranting to you about how a man's getting taller on the train. Why would you believe him? What if it's just a different guy, he says, as if I hadn't considered that at all. On a Wednesday, I spent my entire day looking up ways people could become taller. All I found were bizarre stretches and extreme monstrous he looked, he would walk on the car, sit in his same spot and patiently wait for his stop to come before calmly walking off. I can't focus. How am I supposed to even rationalize this in my mind? My mum thinks I am just distraught over my wife's death. But how am I supposed to explain what is really happening? I won't go into detail about every day, but trust me, he changed every single night. Sometimes noticeably, like gaining a few inches in height. Sometimes he barely changed at all. But every time something was a little bit different. All the time I spend at the store, I'm distracted. I have gone onto different train cars and he still gets on. I have even switched cars after he gets on and he's on the other cars as well. He's in every car at the same time. I tried to explain this to my mum when she came to pick up my kids. She is worried about me. No one believes me. I don't even know if I believe me. This man has entered my life and poked and prodded at my sanity until I feel my grip on reality slipping like a bar of soap through my fingers. What's stopping him from approaching me, attacking me? Why does he just sit there? I've started a nervous shaking that stays with me all day. The thought of what the man will look like tonight stays in the back of my mind like an itch I could never scratch. Last night he walked in, bones crackling like thin ice with every step. His skin so tightly pressed against his bones you could see every ligament on every visible joint. The only clothing he now had was a pair of ripped up track pants and his Dodgers hat. After seeing how monstrous he became and his complete lack of any sort of reaction to my presence, once again I decided to do something I had never done before. I decided to sit in a different seat. I usually stay near the back of the train car because he usually sits at the front. Just 3 stops away from where he usually gets off, I decided I was going to sit in the seat that is right in front of him. After taking 3 deep breaths and leaving any worry behind, I got up and made my way to the empty seat across from him. As I sat down, he didn't even register my existence. I had never seen him at this angle before. Getting a better look only served to fill me with heart-pounding fear and regret. His eyes were sticking out from the sides of his head, his pupils milky white like a blind old dog. What used to be his nose now extended outward like a deer's snout. His teeth were sharp as bear teeth and were always snarled like a threatened lion protecting their young. I sat there just staring deep into its eyes. I'm not a religious man, but looking at this haunted figure in front of me, I knew in my heart I was staring at some unholy creation that crawled from the depths of hell just to torment me with its uncanny presence. As we left the last stop before the creature's usual destination, it finally spoke. Sandy, Luke, Jonathan, Christine, to my mother and cousins I haven't seen in years. Unmoving, unflinching and without so much as a twitch in the ice of its eyes, it listed name after name. My grandparents, my brother, my nieces, nephews. When it ran out of family, it even began saying the names of friends from college and old high school crushes I once had. I felt my fists curl into a ball on my knees as I sat there and listened to this alien creature list off everyone I could ever hold dear to me. Until finally it was its stop. Like every night before, it got up calmly without saying another word and walked off the train into the black void of the night. Whatever I had left of my mind was broken into pieces. This needed to end one way or another. When I first started noticing these changes, I immediately tried to hire on more help at the store, so I didn't have to take the train anymore. I even interviewed a few candidates. Some of them were very good for the position, but every time I went to call them to tell them they got the job, repeating my words, I would open my mouth to say you got the job, and by the time I closed it again, the call was over and they weren't hired. I can't do this. After last night, this cannot continue. With my kids staying with my mum now, no one questioned me getting a Glock G19. I hate guns, they terrify me, but that thing at the other end of the train car terrifies me even more. I spent my entire shift today looking at the gun in my desk drawer, preparing in my mind as to what I was even planning on doing. Getting on the train, I still had no idea. When the creature stepped back on, it looked the same as yesterday. The first time in days it hadn't made a noticeable difference. At the next stop, before I could even think of a plan of action, I got up, ran up beside it, pointing the barrel at its impossibly deformed skull and fired. The creature made no noise as it slumped to the side, its nightmare-inducing body falling limp on the seats beside it. For a split second, I know I saw the figure turn back into the man it once was, just for a fraction of a second. I bolted out of the train. As I ran down the station, I caught a glimpse of the other cars as I ran. There were hundreds of the creature in each car, motionlessly staring directly at me as I ran. I write this on the bridge just 3 miles away from the train station. I write this not as a justification, but rather an explanation, and one last chance to say I love you. I love you, Sandy. I love you, Luke. And I love you, Jonathan. I love you, Mum and Dad. Everyone who will demand an explanation, I hope this provides you some clarity. I'm sorry the hurt that I have caused. I hope I have defeated the man on the train, and God can look me with grace, as I did all I could to defeat this embodiment of hell that crept into my life. But one thing I know for certain, if he doesn't hear my prayers tonight, that won't be the last I see of the man on the train. This next story is by Harambe 556. It is titled, Why I No Longer Walk. university student. I won't disclose my location for privacy reasons, but just know I live in a large European city. I'm working towards a postgraduate degree in English. My school has very limited accommodation, so I don't live on site. I have a smallish studio apartment flat in the outskirts of my city. It's a pretty long journey from my home to campus. Almost every night I stay late studying in my university library. Almost every night I make the walk home in the dark. Once I've left the campus, my route takes me through the nearby park until I reach the canal. I then walk along a footpath, following the canal for half an hour or so, before turning into suburban streets. Another 15-minute walk takes me to a train station, where I catch a night train to my home area. I'm only disclosing my nightly journey to you because it is important to my story. This has never bothered me. In fact, I liked walking on my own when it is late and nobody else is around. It has always calmed me and given me space to think. I enjoy my own company. Thursday last week was like any other evening. I reluctantly finished up working in the library and, rubbing my tired eyes, packed up my things. I remember glancing at my watch and seeing the time, a little past 10 p.m. Leaving the building, I made my way across the lawn, which forms the central courtyard of my campus. Large floodlights illuminate the entire area. They are brilliantly bright, almost blinding. Reaching the main gates of the university, I turned, following a small road enclosed with trees. The university is situated next to a park. At this time of year, it is a lovely stretch of green during the day. However, it would be almost untraversable at night, if not for the streetlights which line the paths. That is how dark it grows here past twilight. On either side of me, as I walked, there was simply a thick wall of blackness, with only the path ahead of me lit up. Every time I walk through the park, I always have the same uncomfortable thought. I always wonder about how someone could be standing only a few meters away from me in the shrubbery, and I would have no idea. My own hand begins to disappear when I stretch it out past the border where the path meets the grass. It makes me shiver a little every time. Imagine my visible stalker shrouded by the night. Reaching the south fence of the park, I turned onto the canal. A small road follows along its length. The water is a murky green, with the scum and algae coating the surface. The moon casts a shimmering, ghostly reflection under the dark depths of the waterway. So there I found myself, last Thursday night, walking along next to the canal. Stupidly, I had forgotten to charge my phone before I left the library. Wanting to conserve the already low battery, I was not listening to music as I usually would. I listened to the sounds of the night as I walked. To my one side the water, to my other thick, densely packed trees. was a man. He was sitting cross-legged directly, almost perfectly in the center of the path. A feeling of unease immediately washed over me. Probably he was a homeless person. There are a lot in my city, but why was he sat like that, out in the open, almost calmly? I should say now that I am a big guy, and I have never shied away from confrontation if it is needed. While this man was making me a little on edge, I still felt pretty confident in my safety. If anything, I assumed him to be completely off his head from drugs or alcohol, causing him to pass out like this in the street. I was soon close enough to clearly see him. A chill washed over me, and my earlier relative calmness was replaced by anxiety. The man was dressed from head to toe in business attire. His trousers were charcoal grey, pressed and smooth. His shirt was a pure cream colour, expensive looking, and his black suit jacket appeared crisp, as if recently ironed. His tie was neat, not too long, not too short, a simple knot. Even his shoes were freshly polished, reflecting the full moon above. On his wrist was a gold watch. It looked like a Rolex. His build was hard to make out from his cross-legged, seated position, but he looked skinny. His skin was pale, standing out in the darkness. His hair was jet black and had been slicked back sharply backwards across his head and down his neck. There was far too much gel in his hair. It cloaked his scalp like glue, glistening in the moonlight. All of this caught my attention and set me aback, but it is not what made me afraid. I was afraid because of how he looked at me. He was smiling, not a gigantic, manic, horror-filling grin. His smile was small and subtle, like he was trying to keep from laughing. It was predatory. In the slight gap between his lips, his teeth winked at me. His eyes were locked with mine. His gaze was impossible to break away from, and I trembled under it. He had hungry eyes, cold and cunning. He stared at me like a crocodile stares at its next meal. As I drew upon him, I slowed down, my mind racing. Should I stop, say something, ignore him? I went with the last option, trying to avoid looking at the strange, eerie figure. I made a beeline for the path beyond him, breathing fast. Even as I moved past him, I felt those reptilian eyes track me, never blinking. I stole a glance down at him. He licked his lips. I found myself even more tormented by nerves once I was a little away from him. I forced myself not to look back, terrified of feeling breath on the back of my neck or a hand on my shoulder. There are always weird people around at night, I thought to myself, desperately trying to calm down. You'll laugh about this in the morning. I tried to inject myself with some macho tough guy courage. Rationally, the guy didn't look that big. I could probably take him if he tried anything. But then I thought back to those eyes and that smile, and I wasn't so sure. After what felt like an eternity, up ahead I saw the dim lights of houses. I would be at the train station in no time, and then I could forget all about the sinister suited man. Feeling relief wash over me at the prospect of safety, I turned back, hoping to see the man gone. I gasped in horror. He was standing now, revealing his true, imposing height, 6'5" at least. His mouth was agape, jaw hanging slack and loose, chin almost against his neck. His colour formed a black O as dark as the icy waters of the canal beside us, or the starless sky above. As I stood rooted to the spot, a strange noise came up out of his throat, echoing through the night. A low groan, guttural and croaking, like a floorboard creaking on nails on a blackboard. It was shockingly loud, sounding as if he was tearing his larynx apart just to produce such an unnatural moan. I stumbled backwards, tripping and slipping on the muddy ground. With alarming speed, the man crouched on all fours, bony limbs jutting out from his thin torso, like some kind of grotesque insect. He began to scuttle towards me like a spider, galloping on his hands and feet with animalistic momentum. Forcing my legs to work, I turned and ran, sprinting off the footpath and down a suburban street away from the canal. Terraced houses flashed past me on either side, windows mostly dark. Looking back, I should have called for help. I should have stopped and knocked on one of the doors and screamed for sanctuary. But in the moment, all I could think about was the thing behind me. I could still hear that creaking groan ringing in my ears. I raced into the next street, then turned into a third. Ahead, I could see the station. It was small, at the best of times, and completely deserted at this hour. Even the staff, a single station supervisor, and a ticket inspector would have gone home by now. To my despair, I heard the telltale screech of a train pulling into the station. If I did not make it, there would not be another for 10 minutes at least. Pushing myself, panting, I bounded up the steps 2 or 3 at a time. I almost leapt over the turnstile, shoving past it. Reaching the train, I threw myself onto it. Not allowing myself to rest, I immediately pressed myself to the window, willing the doors to close and the train to move. At the same time, I scanned the street below the railway bridge, watching in terror for a bony, scuttling figure. But I saw nothing. I collapsed onto a seat as the doors closed and the train pulled away from the platform. My eyes were glued shut and I fought for air. Regaining myself, I reached for my phone. It was dead. I swore loudly. Still, I tried to console myself. I was safe at least. I would get home and call the police there. I sat back and tried to relax as best I could under the circumstances. I stared outside and watched the darkened city roll past. I had a few stops to go before my own, and so I resigned myself to try to sleep. The train was always empty at this time. No sooner had I closed my eyes than did I hear a sound which turned my body to ice and sent my hands into convulsing shakes. A deep, rasping, guttural groan from a few seats behind me. Instinctively I whirled around, at first seeing nothing. Then, 4 rows behind me, between the gaps in the seats, I saw his face peeking at me, grinning, that same hungry, crocodilian gaze. From here I could see a stringy blob of hair gel oozing down his pale forehead. He was smiling a little wider than before, and I could see how yellow his teeth were. There was a small sputtering of dark crimson around the edges of his gums. I fell out of my seat, hyperventilating. He could have stood up, loomed over me, but instead the man mimicked me, dropping from his own seat and onto his hands and knees. Agonizingly, slowly, he began to crawl towards me. His His movements were exaggerated, like a child or a circus clown. He made his way through the garage, still letting out that horrible, sickening moaning sound. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as flight or fight kicked in. Like I said, I've always been willing to defend myself, but again, something in his eyes told me to run instead. I got to my feet and yanked open the small door which connected my garage to the next and ran through, slamming the door behind me. Suddenly, I was thrown off my feet as the train rolled to a halt. I slid along the floor, slamming into the wall just as the train doors opened. Spotting my last chance at escape, I leapt for the open doors, rolling onto the platform outside and smacking my head on the concrete. I staggered backwards still, gripping my throbbing head. I watched as the train doors slid shut again. There was no sign of my pursuer. I continued to stare as the train pulled away, fading into the night, leaving me alone in the cold. I frantically scanned to my left and right, either end of the platform, not believing my nightmare was truly over. But there really was no sign of the man anywhere. The night was empty. I realized that I had no idea where I was. This wasn't the right stop. Slowly, I made my way off the platform and down the stairs, my head turning on a swivel to check behind me. I felt anything but safe. I left the station in a daze. My heart felt like it was going to burst through my chest. The sound of it beating filled my mind. Up ahead I could see the neon lights of an all-night convenience store. I began to increase my pace. I could feel warm blood seeping from my head, and I thought if I tried to run I might pass out. I seemed to enter the store in slow motion, slipping in and out of consciousness. I remember the man at the counter looking at me with concern as I fell against the shelf of crisp packets. I asked him if I could use his phone, and he asked me if I was alright. I said no, I wasn't, and that I needed him to call the police for me. Then I let myself fade to black right there on the floor of the shop. The next day was a blur. When the police arrived, they seemed more concerned with getting me to the emergency room than with listening to my garbled story. I had a pretty severe concussion, so by the time an officer sat down to listen to what I had to say, they chalked it up to an encounter with a trunk warped by my head injury. I was discharged and told to rest. I took a few days off. I hated being home. All I could think about was what happened. I tried to put it out of my mind, but every night I woke up screaming. My dreams are haunted by a grinning figure in an expensive suit. I barely eat. I have to force myself. I find my hands shaking without even realizing, and I have taken to biting my nails until they bleed. When I look in the mirror, I see a thin stranger with dark circles under his eyes. I tried going back to university, but my anxiety only got worse. I checked behind me every few minutes and around corners. When someone called my name, I would jump. I couldn't focus in lectures, and I kept falling asleep due to my nights spent awake, huddled in the corner of my room with the door locked. I decided to write this here, partly as a way to process my experience, and partly because I am scared and I need someone to know. Yesterday, as I ate lunch on my own, my cell phone rang. When I answered, I screamed out loud and broke down sobbing in the middle of campus cafeteria. I think you can guess the noise which greeted me on the other end. So I no longer walk alone at night, but now those dark, shadowy streets are starting to look inviting. Because you see, my phone rang 6 more times yesterday. I ignored it, and every one of the calls was made from my own landline phone, which sits beside my bed. This last one is by discussion smell. Sickly sweet, like overripe fruit left out in the heat too long. At first we joked about it, thought maybe it was a dead deer or something, but curiosity got the better of us and we started pushing through the undergrowth to find the source. And we found him, a man, dead. He was slumped against a tree, half covered by fallen leaves and brush, like he tried to hide himself or just wanted to disappear. He'd clearly been there a while. His skin was greenish black in places, swollen. There were flies and other things. The forest had already started to reclaim him. I won't get into more detail, but you can imagine. Liam froze. I remember him just whispering, "Holy shit, that's a person." I called the police. They told us to stay there until someone arrived, but we were pretty deep in, and it took them over 2 hours to reach us. So yeah, we waited with the body. The smell didn't go away. If anything, it got thicker, heavier. The air felt wrong, like it was pressing in on us. The forest had gone quiet too. No birds, no bugs, just stillness. It felt like we weren't alone, but we were. I kept telling myself we were. As it got darker, things got worse. Liam started pacing. I sat on a log a few feet from the body, trying not to look at it, but somehow always ended up staring. And maybe this was just my mind playing tricks on me, but his head looked like it had turned slightly since we found him. Just a little, enough to notice. I didn't say anything. Then came the whispers. I swear I heard someone say my name, soft, right behind me. I turned around fast, but there was no one there, just trees. Liam heard it too. He looked at me and said, "Did you hear that?" We both went dead quiet. Then we heard this slow, soft creaking, like weight shifting on wood, like someone leaning forward from a tree. We didn't run, we didn't scream, we just sat, stared at each other, waited for the rangers. Eventually they came. Lights, radios, flashlights. One of them took us back to the trailhead while the others stayed behind. They told us the man had likely taken his own life. There was no ID. No one ever came forward. A quiet suicide, they said. But it didn't feel quiet. After that day I started having dreams. Always the same. I'm standing in the woods again, staring at that same tree. But the man isn't slumped anymore. He's standing, facing me. His mouth is too wide and he doesn't blink. And he speaks. Not loud, just a whisper. "You shouldn't have found me." Liam had them too. He told me over text a few nights later. We stopped hiking after that. Liam got weird, quiet. He'd never sleep through the night. Said he kept waking up to that smell. That same smell from the woods, filling his room. He told me once he saw footprints in the dirt under his window. Bare, human, facing inward. I didn't believe him until I smelled it too. Once in my apartment, no open windows, just a sudden sharp wave of sweet rot, and then it was gone. I barely slept that night. We've moved on since then. Sort of. Liam and I don't talk much anymore. It's not bad blood, we just avoid it. Like acknowledging sense to me because I haven't, and I don't think I ever will.
So that is the last story for today. I hope you enjoyed them all. Until next time.